Hello everybody and welcome to the Assessment 3 Flipped Collaborate session. This session is coming to you from a hotel in Bali, so hopefully my internet will be reliable enough to get through this and the quality will be okay at your end. So I hope you're all having a nice enjoyable time, perhaps continuing with your holiday while studying, and that you had a great break over the Christmas holiday break. So we'll get started. We will go through this assessment today. I've just got a bit of a PowerPoint which I will bring up now. Okay, it might take a little minute for that to come up, but this is the Assessment 3 case study analysis. The assessment is due on the Monday, the 6th of February at 5 p.m. It has a 1,500 word limit, and the ELAs will not be able to read any more than 1,650 words, which is the maximum amount. So just keep that in mind to make sure that you don't go over 1,650 words, which is the absolute maximum. And just also be aware that if you go under the word limit of 1,500, that you might find it difficult to cover all the criteria. There's quite a lot of criteria to cover, so you need to be writing succinctly and hopefully using, you know, as many of those words in your limit as you can to cover that criteria. It's a 30% weighting on this assessment, and as I said, due on Monday, 6th of February. The content for this assessment is pretty much all of what we've covered in this course from weeks 1 to 11. It's an extension of both assessments 1 and 2, so that includes all of the content in week 1 to 6, as well as for the last few weeks in weeks 7 to 11. So I highly recommend that you go back and have a look at your previous 2 assessments and the feedback that you received on those assessments, because that will really help you going forward with this 3rd assessment. Hopefully your ideas and your learning should all be in this assessment piece, and we do expect to see an inclusive response that covers all the learnings of the unit so far. Okay, so the assessment does require you to engage with a case study and consider how you would respond as a teacher. So this is really all about bringing together all of your learnings so far and showing us how you can actually put those learnings into practice, and what you would do if you had a student that had a behavioural difficulty or challenge and that you had to somehow respond to that behaviour in the classroom. So you will be drawing together all of your theories that you've learned so far and the models for learning in response to a range of behaviours in the classroom. You are required to create strategies to tackle the learning behaviour in the classroom, and there's an extra layer here in that your response is expected to be inclusive. So inclusive of all the children in the classroom. It needs to consider all of the children in the classroom, but specifically the child in the case study, and to also have a look at ethical practices with families, community and support agencies. So what does that mean? Really it means that you are identifying behaviour as you've done in previous assessments, so having a look at the case study, there, identifying in that scenario, and then applying again some kind of theory that will support the understanding of that behaviour, and then thinking about, previously you've thought about resources, behaviour and strategies, so again you will be going into depth with that, and there's an extra layer now of considering family and community support outside of the classroom. So, you know, you'll be looking again at frameworks such as ACARA, policies such as, you know, you might consider a school policy such as a bullying policy or a behaviour policy, You'll be also applying theory to the scenario. For example, some of the behavioural theories that you've looked at, such as Maslow, or social cultural theory. You might also consider multiple intelligence theory. So really just make sure that the theories do match the scenario and they really do support the child. So, right, you don't need to bring in every single theory that you can think of. Just try to find or consider a theory that best matches the scenario and the behaviour that you've identified. You might look at some models of learning in response to the behaviour, for example, inquiry learning or project-based learning. These are just examples. There, of course, are many models of learning that might be appropriate to the scenario that you've chosen. Now, the extra layer in assessment 3 that you may not have tackled in previous assessments is that you do need to make sure that your response to the case study is inclusive. So that means that although you're specifically supporting the child in the scenario, you do also need to consider all children, how your response would fit in with the whole classroom environment. So how would you make sure that that child that you're supporting doesn't feel excluded from the whole class, and how might the whole class also have some kind of involvement in your strategy or in your model of learning? So inclusive education usually means that all children are considered, such as it could be children with a special need or some kind of special background that may not be the norm for the rest of the class. So it just means that you need to approach your classroom strategy or your model of learning as being inclusive. So it includes all children, especially your particular child in the scenario. That's the one that you would need to discuss the most, but definitely consider your strategy or your model of learning as being part of a whole program or a whole classroom strategy. Now, you'll see the word ethical coming up also. Don't get too hung up on that. Really, it just means that it means ethical as in, you know, very considerate to the child's background. It could be, for example, considering a child's religious requirement or considering how and where they fit into their own community. So it just means really being very sensitive and being very careful of making sure that the child and family are supported in a way that is sensitive and well, ethical, really. Okay, you're also asked to think now a little bit more beyond the classroom. So have a think about how you can involve the family in your strategy, the community perhaps, or even a support agency. There are some special programs that you might consider bringing into the classroom to support that child. Or it could be inclusive of the whole class with that mind in particular. Now, you may have touched on kinds of sources or resources. I know a lot of you did already touch on this, but I think in this assessment it's a little bit focused. So we hope to see a little bit more depth around that in this assessment. Okay, you only need to include one case study. So please make sure that you just choose one case study so that you can go into depth for that case study. Please do not choose any more than one case study. You reflect on the behaviour displayed and you describe the approaches that you would use to guide and support the child. Again, I'm emphasising that it is the child in the case study that should be given the most attention in your writing, even though you will be considering where that child fits as being included in the whole class environment. Just keep in mind too that you've only been provided with a snapshot of information about the learner, so just be careful of making huge generalisations or giving definitive answers about what is the right approach for the child. So just, yeah, it's always a good idea to come up with some multiple viewpoints or how you might approach the actual the child's behaviour analysis, coming up with some multiple reasons, and then obviously in the recommendations you'll come up with what is your final recommendation, or it could be a few different recommendations. Okay. So I've just given a bit of an example of what we might see in an exemplary case analysis. So if you're really, you're aiming for the HD, then we would see all of these elements. You would identify and discuss a variety of effective strategies. This is what I mean by not giving just one answer to the problem, but actually coming up with a variety of different ideas about what interventions could support the learner in the case study. Consider how you would prepare the physical and social environment. So looking at how you might arrange your classroom, what resources might be in your classroom, how you're setting up the learning. Is it at tables, or is it in groups, in pairs, or is there a comfortable area where you can sit all together with cushions? Have a think about how the environment might support the child. Definitely identify some possible family, cultural and ethical considerations related to the case study, and really have a look and see what policies and frameworks that could possibly support the child in relation to that cultural influences. Consider and discuss a behaviour framework, strategy and model that you would apply for your case study. So in your final recommendations, you might just have one model of learning. When I say model of learning, for example, so I know you might come up with one major one in the end that is your final recommendation. Just of theories have been used to guide your approaches as well. This could be a little slow because of my internet connection. I'm sorry about that. Okay, well, I'm waiting for the next one to come up. Okay. Just a few quick tips. I've been a snapshot of the learner. We've already discussed this, but just be careful not to jump to conclusions. Make sure that you're using the information that's in the case study rather than inventing new information in order to identify the reasons for behaviour. You should be fairly good at that after the last two assessments. Offer a range of inclusive practices. We've already discussed that too. And consider the whole class and the learner as the individual. Again, we've discussed that. And finally, this is a good tip to consider. Based on the learnings of another term used for that is behaviour management plan. And what that pretty much means is that you would have a look at the behaviour only and respond to that behaviour in a plan. So for example, it might be, and these do exist in schools quite a bit, behaviour support plans, where the child, let's just say child is talking to a teacher or pushing other children, then they might be the behaviours that you just look at, and there may be some kind of reward or punishment associated with that behaviour. Behaviour when it occurs, maybe punishing it when it occurs, putting it when it doesn't occur, and it's a very closely monitored plan, one with child. Now, that's something that we're not looking for at all. So please try to avoid a behaviour management plan. If that's not clear enough for you, make sure you put up your questions in the discussion board and we can explain that a little bit more. Do research as well, that would be helpful. Wanting to see behaviour management plan, classroom management approaches. So what we mean by that is the strategies or the learning model that you're providing will be about minimising the current behaviour, but most importantly, avoiding further escalation of the problem. So really trying to get to the heart of the behaviour. What are the social cultural influences of the behaviour, looking at your theory and putting in place some practices that will prevent behaviour from further escalating. And it would also hopefully prevent more of that behaviour manifesting in the classroom. Sometimes a particular child's behaviour can rub off on another child, and then, you know, it can have a bit of a group mentality with the behaviour. So we're looking at getting to the heart of the behaviour and trying to prevent it rather than just responding to it once it's already happened. Okay, so giving you a bit of idea on how you might allocate your words or your word limit in this assessment. It's only a guide. You certainly don't have to follow this. The most important thing is that you should be guided by the holistic rubric and the essay criteria. But if you're looking for some guidance on structure, here's a bit of a recommendation. I would say 100 words to introduce your case study briefly. So when you do this, not just copy and paste the case study, just explain the case study briefly in your own words. The analysis will then be looking carefully at the behaviour, identifying the behaviour. It will try to understand the behaviour, maybe bringing theory to do that. In fact, I recommend bringing in theory to help with that analysis. 550 to 600 words. In your findings, again, about 550 to 600 words, coming up with multiple strategies, approaches, models, consideration to frameworks, community support, all of that comes into your findings. And then your recommendations will be from your analysis and your findings, what would be your final recommendations? So this is not a conclusion. It's the recommendations takes the place of a conclusion, and it will really just be a short explanation of, after looking at your analysis and looking at all the possibilities, you've now decided on what will be the overall best approach or the best recommendations of strategies for the teacher and perhaps the family and the community as well. So we don't expect to see any new information in the recommendations. It can even be dot points if you prefer. This assessment is really not an essay. It really looks more like a report. However, we still expect to see the same level of discussion that you would see in an essay. We'll be able to provide some more information on the word allocation in the discussion board as well. So don't forget to ask your questions. Okay, some quick tips. It's an academic writing piece, so you must write in third person. You must use the essential and supportive readings and resources to support your discussion. It's absolutely essential that we see in-text referencing throughout, and a reference list must be provided in order to pass. The structure of the essay is more closely related to a report. However, we do it also, as I said before, expect to see a discussion and demonstration of critical understandings, the same as we would essay. Not need a formal recommendations take the place of a conclusion. We don't usually expect to see any new information included in the recommendations, and certainly there shouldn't be any need for in-text citations. in your recommendations, because you should have already referenced your authors in your analysis and in your findings. You can use headings and subheadings if you wish to provide a clear structure. You should avoid dot points in the main body of your essay because in the main body of your assessment, mainly because we want to see discussion in the analysis and the findings. However, you can use dot points in the recommendation. Please avoid copying and pasting dot points from your source though. We don't want to see big slabs of copied dot points. Will come up usually in the Turnitin in the originality report, and we want to actually see your very clear understandings in your own words rather than copying big slabs of writing from other sources. You can include images if you wish to provide clarity, however, you won't receive any extra marks for these. If you do include images, please ensure you reference them. You also may include appendices if this assists you with your writing to provide clarity. Again, there won't be any extra marks awarded for appendices. So just in summary, this criteria really to critique and analyse the case study, your applications of strategies for classroom practice, and your academic expression. Now, I'm not going to go through the entire and make sure you have a full understanding of that holistic rubric, keeping in mind that at each level you need to have covered all of the dot points to reach that particular grade level. Please do put any questions you have about the rubric on the discussion board or bring them to the Q&A session that's coming up soon. I will just quickly have a look at the pass part of the rubric, of course, because at very bare minimum you obviously would like to pass, and there's a couple of things in here that I think need a bit of clarification. It is mainly dot point 4, because I know I get lots of questions about how in with your response. And just to clarify here, you will pass as long as you include some plans that include family or community or support agencies. If you can include all three in your response, that's great as well. And obviously that will help you reach a higher level and a more in-depth response. However, if your scenario only requires believe that is only to include family or support agency, a support agency as your one definitive strategy. If you just say, oh, I'm going to bring in an outside or an outside program or outside support as the response, then this to me is not an inclusive approach, because it takes away again, though, I just want to emphasize that, tight. So if you find that you can only include family and a support agency as well as your own classroom practice, then you will still pass. Or if you include one of those, family or community or support agencies, plus you do need to also include your own teacher practice, then you will pass. Okay, the case study demonstrates a developing capacity to critique and analyse behaviour and create strategies for working inclusively in the classroom. I think everything else is quite clear. Just again, keep in mind that your academic writing is important to reach a pass level. If you have struggled with your academic writing in the previous two essays, I recommend that you seek support from Smart Thinking or your tutor, or if you have any other avenues of support, I highly recommend that, because the ELA, having given feedback on previous assessments, they will now be expecting to see that you have made some progress in the area of academic writing. So they may just be a little bit tougher on that. So please make sure that you have really addressed any issues from your previous assessments. Okay, please post any questions that you have to the discussion board. The ELA will respond to those questions as usual, but also they will come to the question and answer collaborate session prepared to answer those questions in more detail. The Q&A collaborate will be held on Wednesday the 18th of January at 8 p.m. AEDT. We would love to see you all there. As I said, please post your questions to the board prior to the session, but also come along prepared with any other questions that you would like to ask. And I hope that has provided you with enough information to get going on assessment 3, and good luck with it. See you later.